Bobby Marks, ESPN. You know it. This Game 3 in many series kind of sets the table, sets the tone. And did Philadelphia change the perception of many with the way they were able to win Game 2? Forget some of the adjustments that they made and the players executing, but the fact that they were able to win a game that they were under 100.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, especially for me who picked, I think, Toronto in 6, and coming off Game 1 where they thoroughly got outplayed to kind of make the game ugly, muddy it up a little bit without Embiid at full strength, and it showed that they can play a different style if needed. And you're right. I mean, whoever wins tonight puts an immense amount of pressure going into a Game 4, either Philadelphia or Toronto. But if you're going to get that type of production, or if you're going to play through Jimmy Butler like you did on Monday night, you got a heck of a chance, especially with being at home for the next 2 games here.
Yeah, what are some of the things that the Sixers did in Game 2 that can carry over now? Like if you're watching, hey, they made these adjustments, and I think they can keep doing this. I mean, some things obviously Toronto's going to look at and try to combat, but what are some of the things that Toronto might have some trouble figuring out?
Well, I think what Philadelphia did in Game 2 is that they realized that Jimmy Butler's probably a number 1 or number 2 option, that he's not a 4th or 5th guy on a team, and that, that for him to have the same amount of shots that J.J. Redick gets up in a game is not the case, and probably not to have your offense run through Redick here. So I'm anticipating Toronto to probably key in a little bit more on Butler, and that opens things up for Redick. I mean, I think J.J.'s in a perfect role here. He's not a number 2 or 3 option. He could be that 4th guy, but my concern going into the series really was about Embiid. And I think they showed on Monday night that, Joel Embiid going 2 for 7, but making a big shot at the end of the game, that they can win games without him. But you're going to need Harris and Butler to play at a high level there.
Embiid obviously makes his team go. They won the game with him not doing very much. How much of a surprise is that? And number 2, can they continue to win games if Embiid doesn't give you very much?
Well, I don't know if they can win 4 games in this series. If Embiid is at 8 or 9 points a game, I think that's going to be hard to pull off. I think you could do that against Brooklyn, because Brooklyn was so undersized that you can throw Bolan out there and have him play extended minutes. I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. I think he'll have trouble. I think you've seen him have trouble with Gasol and Ibaka and Siakam, players that have length. So yeah, I think, getting Joel, healthy and playing extended minutes, I'm not saying getting him to a 30 and 15 game, but having him become serviceable to give you something more than maybe he gave you the other night is how you're going to win probably 4 games in this series.
Bobby Marks, ESPN, with us here, former front office executive with the New Jersey Nets. And, we pigeonhole guys sometimes, and sometimes people want more from Ben Simmons. They want him to shoot. They want him to do this. They want him to do that. But was Brett Brown asking him to play 44 minutes of tenacious defense on Kawhi Leonard maybe his best role in this series?
I think it is. I think because his size gives Leonard trouble. And you're probably saying, well, how does that happen if a guy scores, is averaging 40 in the first 2 games? But I think you saw in Game 2 where, Kawhi was limited, especially in that first quarter where Philadelphia was able to set a tone here. And, we often forget about Ben. I mean, this is year 2 for him. I mean, we do ask for a lot from him because we know how good of a player he can be. But I like where, what else can you do to keep yourself on the floor here? If you're not scoring the ball, can you lock up one of their better defenders or guard him as good as anybody can? And I think we saw that from Ben on Monday.
Yeah, he's a guy who is so interesting in terms of he scores, 38 in that game against Brooklyn. He just takes the ball to the basket at will and, had this determination, and then that kind of goes away. How frustrating is that as an organization when you see that from him and then you don't see it, like, regularly? For me, I always envision, like, does somebody sit the player down and be like, yo, look at this video of you. How come we can't get that from you, more consistently? Because if Ben would take the ball to the basket in this series, potentially get Kawhi Leonard in some foul trouble.
Well, I think it's frustrating because of the expectation level where people expect this team to go. I think if this was a team that was a 6 or 7 seed and was, this is kind of year one of just figuring it out, then you could say, yeah, it's part of the learning curve. But we've seen it the last 2, this is year 2 now, certainly in that Boston series last year, that when he is passive and not aggressive, this team usually fails. And we did see it in the Brooklyn series when his ability to get to the basket, his ability to find open guys, it really changes the dynamic here. So we'll see tonight. I mean, we're 2 games into the series, but that Toronto defense is tough. I mean, it's hard to compare Toronto and Brooklyn. It really is. I mean, but Toronto is they're at a different level here. I mean, they really are, and I give Philadelphia a lot of credit just to get back, even this series up coming home.
Bobby Marks with us, Sixers, Raptors. We'll get into some of the other series as well. And in this one, there's so much to go here because obviously the Raptors won game 1. They shot the lights out and played very well. The Sixers just didn't play well. They didn't shoot very well. They made their adjustments in game 2. We know Nick Nurse is going to make some adjustments. So if you're the Raptors and you have 2 days to go over this, what is the biggest thing that they are trying to figure out moving on to game 3 that really stymied them potentially in game 2?
I think how can you speed up the game a little bit here? I think if it falls into a half-court game, I think they can be in short games, can get the score down a little bit. I think if the score's in the low hundreds or, even in the 90s, I don't think that will happen. I think that's going to play to Philadelphia's advantage. I think where Toronto gets in trouble is that when the ball stops, when you see guys starting to go ISO, when you see Lowry going ISO, even Kawhi to an extent, and you get into some lulls there from a shooting perspective here. So I think if you're Toronto here, I think how do you try to speed up the game from the get-go and try to get this crowd out of it? But the worst thing that could happen is if you get down 12-2, 12-4, now you're trying to play catch-up from the get-go.
Yeah, and one thing is that Embiid really hasn't gotten going much in this series, but Tobias Harris, he had a role defensively against Marc Gasol. Can they do that again, or is that an area too where the Raptors might say, all right, if you're going to go with Harris on Gasol again? But my question is, can you lean on Gasol, this version of him, to can you game plan more for him?
I think so, because I think especially with him starting, it's a little bit of a different role than maybe when they got him in the regular season. I think if Philadelphia wants to go small and put Harris at the 5 here, I think that's a disadvantage for Philadelphia, for Toronto. It's not like Tobias is down low posting up like we saw with Nikola Vucevic in the Orlando series, and Vucevic had a hard time doing it. And it allows you to stretch the offense out a little bit, where now makes Gasol go out to the perimeter.
Yeah, and another thing is, too, Gasol, the minute you saw, as soon as they put Boban in the game, he popped out and hit a 3 in that game, right? So they'll take, yeah. Right? But also the role that Monroe had in this game, he gave problems to Siakam. Do you think Siakam and how they figure that out is one of the bigger challenges for them? If they go back with Embiid there?
I think so. I think you're right. I mean, Monroe is probably a better fit in this series than Boban is, just the ability to, from a defensive standpoint, the ability to kind of post up, more probably back to the basket, player here. And yeah, I mean, I think Siakam did struggle a little bit defensively. I think it's important for Toronto to kind of figure out what the matchups are going to be. I mean, that's, I think every game takes on its own identity. Although it's 7 games or best of 7 here, every game is so much different. And you have now, 3 days after game 2 that they've had to game plan here.
Yeah. How much game planning goes in, like, today? Is that done and over with? Is this a relaxation day, or are they still hammering out video?
I think the game ends Monday. You fly home. You're watching film. I think Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday is probably more game planning. Wednesday you kind of implement what you see with the team here, and then today is probably more walkthrough to kind of hammer home as far as how you're going to go out and attack. I think it's a little bit different with, if Philly was down 2-0 here, then you would probably see, maybe we see a lineup change. I don't know what you could do. Maybe we see a rotation change here, but I think you kind of stick what you have going into tonight.
Yeah, it should be interesting, this Game 3, because how much, mentally the Sixers, they couldn't beat the Bucks. They went to Milwaukee and beat the Bucks. They couldn't beat the Celtics. They finally got that win against the Celtics. They hadn't beaten the Raptors since 2012. They finally got that win. Do you see a team that is gaining confidence? And, Brett Brown admitted the other day, and I guess he was indirectly calling guys like you out. Hey, 18 guys, 16 of them picked against the Sixers. Our own home media, 6 guys picked against us. They seem like they have this kind of almost like the Eagles, everybody's against us, here we go. But they've knocked off a bunch of hurdles, beating the Bucks, the Celtics, and now the Raptors.
I hope Coach Brown proves me wrong. I really do. I hope he proves a lot of us wrong. That's probably the one thing of this business I don't like doing, making predictions, because people hold that against you. But yeah, hey, if you play like you did Monday and you play like you did outside of Game 1 in the Brooklyn series, you have as good as a chance of any of these Eastern Conference teams to get out of this out of the East here. And I think that's where I think all 4 teams that are remaining, there's a lot of parity here. There's not one that can there's not one that kind of stands out. I think Milwaukee has showed you their flaws. You don't know sometimes what you're going to get from that Boston team each night. And now you're seeing, as far as Toronto, that you can go into Toronto and beat this team. And that's the best part of what they did on Monday, is that you're not relying on home court to go out and, you're forced to win 2 games. Yeah, if you split, let's say, you can go up there in a Game 5 and steal a road game because you've already been able to do it.
Hardest thing for me to see, Bobby, is if the Sixers lose this game, they would either have to win 3 straight games and one of them in Toronto, or win 2 games and one being a Game 7 in Toronto. That's why for the Sixers, it's got to be tonight. You got to win tonight to win this series.
Well, tonight's probably more must-win for Philadelphia than it is for Toronto. I really do believe that, because then if you're Toronto and you win it, then you basically are playing with house money going into a Game 4. And so I do think that there is a lot of pressure for this team to win. And it's funny is that when you look back on how this team was put together, if the roster had not changed over, I would have concerns. Yeah, I think a lot of us would have concerns if, no offense to Robert Covington and Dario Saric and, as far as, the players that were sent out in the trade, but you're not in this series without Butler or Tobias Harris. You're probably not out of the first round against Brooklyn without the guys that you got in to acquire. So I think there is somewhat of a little bit of a comfort level knowing that these guys have played in big games. You know that Jimmy Butler, what you're going to get from Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about him coming into a game 3, because you know what he can do, what he did in Chicago, even in Minnesota last year.
Yeah. Now, one thing, it's interesting because you led me kind of where I wanted to go with you, Bobby, is which team has more at stake here? You got Butler, Harris, J.J. Redick, all with free agency staring at them. And then you got Kawhi Leonard on the other side. If Toronto loses this series, that's an epic fail for them, is it not?
Well, I don't. Yeah, I would say the goal was when you made the Leonard trade was that you were going to put yourself into to try to win a championship, and you're basically in the same spot as you were a year ago, losing in the second round again. And I do not. I agree with Masai doing it as far as kind of pushing his chips into the middle, and then. What it does is that you wait for 6 weeks for Leonard to make a decision, as far as basically the same roster returns, and he'll have to figure out if Toronto is going to be the place he wants to commit to, where in the case of Philadelphia, it's a little bit different because although there'll be a market for Harris and Butler, let's face it. You plop down a max contract for both guys, and they're going to be back next year. The likelihood is here. So I think it changes a little bit here. Yes, I think if you're looking at it from a pressure standpoint, the number 2 seed, a team that kind of, as I said, pushed all their chips into the middle, yeah, I would say they have probably the more pressure here.
Yeah, I find it interesting what Elton Brand might have to go through. Let's say the Sixers win the series and Jimmy Butler, has a game like he did, another game like he did. You almost have to, answer to him. And Tobias Harris has a couple of good games, but he hasn't been the man. and you got to pay them both the same. That's an interesting conundrum that would be staring at you guys like you, right?
Well, it's funny because, whenever we talk about max players, we always think it has to be an all NBA player, it has to be an all-star level player. I mean, and get paid.
Right.
I mean, there's probably a bigger market for Tobias Harris than Jimmy Butler, and it's because of teams are looking for fours that can stretch the floor. If you're looking at teams like Brooklyn and Utah, Dallas, those are the teams that have cap space. That will dictate as far as how much or what Elton Brand can spend. They're not restricted free agents. You don't have the right to match. Does that change a little bit with Jimmy? I think it does. I don't know if I see a team out there offering him 4 years, $140 million. So it's kind of a little bit of, you play a little bit of Russian roulette. Do you go the blank check route where you basically say, hey, pick a number, and go from there, or do you kind of hold your feet to the ground a little bit? And going that way is hard because you lose one of those guys. You gave up a lot to get them. You have cap space, but as we saw last year, free agency is a bear. I mean, going out getting these main guys is hard, and I think that's why Ellen was able to do that during the season, is try to get to the top 10 free agents and try to keep them.
Yeah, and then, of course, you got what's going on with Kyrie and Boston, and then people don't realize it because it's not as high profile. There's a lot of free agents on that Bucks team that can go walking out the door, too. There's a lot at stake for this Bucks team.
Well, there is, and one of those you signed to an extension in Eric Bledsoe, but you've got the Giannis Supermax looming over your head next summer. 5 years, I think $250 million. And what's the cost of Chris Middleton going to be? He's not a max guy, but he might get a max because it's supply and demand, as I said. And you've got Lopez, you've got Mirotic, you've got Malcolm Brogdon. So you can certainly bring that group back, but what happens if you lose in the second round?
Right.
What else? Do you look to see what else is out there? Do you dip your toe in the free agent pool here, or do you kind of bring back the same group? And it's going to be, it's not going to be a $115 million group. That group's going to be a lot more expensive. No
doubt. The East has so much at stake, depending on what happens potentially with these four teams. And two of them are going to be gone. We'll see what happens. We got Sixers, Raptors. We got Bucks, Celtics. Are you surprised at how that series is gone, or is it kind of – I mean, you got both teams winning pretty handily. Who does that favor? Boston coming home obviously has the home court, but did Game 2 kind of make you feel like, all right, the Bucks got their sea legs on them? Because a lot of people figured, all right, the Bucks don't have the experience. They get beaten Game 1, and that, hey, the Celtics have been waiting for this moment to take somebody out, and they did it. And then I was surprised at how the Bucks were able to answer so easily.
Well, I think if they can get Malcolm Brogdon back for Game 3, I think that helps a lot. I mean, especially one of your top scorers here, and we'll see if he'll be ready to go. I mean, I think the defense that Brad Stevens is able to put in on Giannis, I mean, it reminds me of like a team playing hockey. The old Devils teams back in the late 90s
year, like
when they put the trap in.
Yeah.
Where you got a wall of four guys here and basically said try to get around it. So I'm actually surprised Milwaukee came back and won that game too. But when you're making shots and you're making threes, it's basically feast or famine, and that can kind of get you on a roll here. But you're split. You go home. That's a hard place to win. I mean, they did not do it last year at all in that first round here. So we'll see. We'll see if Giannis, can play at an MVP level. But I think if you can get Brogdon back, that just kind of gives you a little bit of a different dynamic.
All right, a couple more for Bobby Marks here. The NBA players only one game tonight, just that Sixer game. But is Golden State Houston? Last year, I thought it would be a short series. They gave us the 7. Is this year the year we get the short series?
Yes. It is, to the fact that I've already written up Houston's post-mortem obituary. I see a Golden State team.
What do you do, though, if you're Houston? You break that thing up? I mean, you keep trying to out-Warriors the Warriors when they're in their peak prime. I mean, what are they thinking?
Well, it's hard. It's hard. I know we always use the word blow-up or roster overhaul, but you've got $76 million committed to Chris Paul and James Harden next year, and your rest of your roster are on great team-friendly contracts with Capella, PJ Tucker, Eric Gordon there. So it's like you got to hit singles in free agency. I mean, that's basically you got to build out your bench with, minimum guys, bargains, and that's what happens when you commit that much money and you lose in the second round, or you don't win a championship here is that you're severely restricted as far as how you do things. And the Kenneth Freeds and the Austin Rivers are not going to be there. And those buyout guys, you're going to have to wait until December or January here. So I just, Golden State has proven every year to win on the road. They can win big games on the road. Does that mean they'll win a game 3? Probably not, but I could see them winning a game 4 and wrapping that thing up in game 5 back in Oakland.
All right, that one's on Saturday. And then the last one, you got that split too, so we got a good one there. Can either one of those teams surprise either of the other two teams in the finals?
As far as Denver, Portland?
Yep.
I have a hard time believing that either one of those teams, whoever gets through, can beat Golden State and make that a competitive series. I just look at Portland and how banged up this team has been. You're relying so much on Lillard and McCollum, and Kanter has been nicked up here. And I think Denver, I think the inconsistency of being young, although they did get out of that first round, I just have a hard time believing that they can put together 4 games here to win, in a Western Conference Finals.
All right, Bobby Marks, and my producer tells me you are getting a chance to watch the games or the game at home tonight. But if you are out on the road checking out one of these series, what's the next game that you want to be live for?
Oh, I would want to be at a game 3. I mean, a game 4 if based on what happens tonight. I think that would be, it would be amazing as far as how your emotions, at least the fans' emotions will be based on, whatever happens, you'll be in a must-win here.
All right, Philly and the Raptors, 8 o'clock tonight, 97.3 ESPN's coverage. Tom McGinnis on the call right here. Bobby Marks at Bobby Marks 42, and follow him there. And, of course, kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Do you think Philly wins tonight? Game 3, home?
I do.
Yeah?
I do. I do think they win. I really do. I think the rest, 3 days off will help them beat. I think I don't know. I haven't seen an update on Mike Scott if he's playing or not. I mean, that's something that was big for them in that Brooklyn series. If they can get kind of Mike Scott back to give you another bench guy, because I think you are a little bit limited here. But I do think Philly wins a game 3 tonight.
All right, Bobby Marks likes the Sixers. We'll see what happens, because if the Sixers win, they are 14-6 all time when they lead the series 2-1 in the best of 7. We know the game 3 winner in the best of 7 wins the series 73.5% of the time. Bobby, thanks so much, pal.
You're welcome. Appreciate it.